Alright, I look enough like a Batman dork here to make this kind of video. Let's talk about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I'm like many of you out there, I adore Rocksteady. They are the pinnacle of superhero video game developers. Arkham City is probably my favorite superhero video game of all time, from the setting to the ending, to the different playable characters, to the combat, to the new upgrade systems, the Riddler trophies and challenges. It's a beautiful video game, one of my favorites of all time, and I adore, like many of you as well, the entirety of that trilogy. Just Rocksteady couldn't miss. So when we heard about this Suicide Squad game, naturally, I had a lot of optimism for it. And even as a lot of the negative press rolled in, what I saw with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League didn't look awful to me. It just didn't look like what I would want out of this developer. So I tried to go in with as clean of a slate as possible. I did end up having to buy the deluxe edition of this game to get as early access as possible, because as we covered in a video earlier this week on the channel, yeah, they weren't doing review codes, and then I was told I was going to get a review code, and then I was rejected for a review. It was a super weird process behind the scenes. So I was just like, you know what? I'm buying it because I buy all my games anyway. Anyone I review, I buy here, so don't worry. It's not like a point of privilege here. It's just that the earlier the access, the better, right? So I didn't want to rush through it, so I know I'm a couple days late compared to other YouTubers out there, but I really wanted to give this game an honest chance. I feel like a lot of people stepped into it with preconceived notions and rushed to the game to firm those up and then put out their videos. For me, personally, as a huge Rocksteady fan and looking at the game as someone who thought, you know what, this doesn't look bad, as someone who reviewed a lot of bad games from, say, Game Mill, like The Walking Dead Destinies, Avatar, Quest for Balance, to Forspoken and Redfall, like, when I looked at Suicide Squad, I went, that really isn't, to me, an awful-looking video game. So let's see what the story has to offer. Let's see what the gameplay has to offer. What does it evolve into? And I won't say it's a bad game, because I don't think it is, but it's a super disappointing video game. When I wrapped it up, I was just so dead inside. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. It was one of those feelings of, how did we get here? What happened? And I'm not going to sell it to you like it's an awful game. It's definitely a wait for a sale kind of game, because it works. It plays fine. There's great humor. We'll go over the pros and cons, but overall, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League could have been so much better, and as I got further and further into the game, it spelled it out more and more why that was the case, and that's live service, a rushed story, and some real questionable gameplay decisions and mission design. So let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're new here and you're into reviews, I try to do them as early as possible, but it's getting more and more difficult these days with the lack of access. Still, consider subscribing. I appreciate you showing up nonetheless. So let's do a generic kind of rundown of what's happening here in Metropolis. So the Suicide Squad has bombs planted in their head, and they must comply as the newly formed Task Force X. And in order to survive, they need to slay the Justice League, who's wreaking havoc across Metropolis because Brainiac has taken complete control of them. And he wants to turn the world into a new Kolu, meaning everyone must die on Earth. Now, keep in mind as I'm going through everything here, this game takes place in the Arkham universe, which I think if it did it, most people would be a lot more positive on places this story goes to. But since it's set in that Arkhamverse, yeah, they're playing with fire here with some of their decision making. I want to start off positive and note the things I think the game does right. First and foremost, I've always called for more games to let you play as the villains or the anti-heroes. I know we don't get a ton of superhero games outside of like the really big ones, your Batman, Spider-Mans, and so on. But I think it's really cool here that you play as villains, and they, for the most part, outside of some behavioral changes that randomly happen, which I found questionable, particularly with Harley Quinn, they do behave like villains. I'm talking like peeing on dead bodies type nasty behavior. And I like that. It makes for a much more entertaining ride, and at least for the first half of the game, which the whole story took me about 10 hours to beat, beyond any of the side content I put additional hours into. The first half was entertaining and enjoyable. That was mostly due to two things. Once again, playing as the villains and seeing the heroes you know and love behave as villains. Like, Batman pretty much functions as a horror character in this game. You see his handiwork everywhere. You have cops hanging from ceilings, people with their necks sliced open, and you're like, the dude I spent 4 games if you like Arkham Origins and, you know, want to acknowledge it, unlike WB, this dude is slaying people out here. And I feel like we got a little taste of that with Injustice, but this goes to, I think, a whole other level. And so because it's M-rated and they're not afraid to show blood, like people's heads blowing off, I mean, it can get pretty crazy, and that makes the game definitely entertaining. There's this one moment that I will show you where Batman beats the heck out of Flash, and it is that like, whoa, oh, he's still going, right? It reminds me of the latest Batman movie toward the end where his rage just takes over. And I feel like it was paying homage to a scene like that personally, which is my favorite style of Batman, when he's just really losing it and the brutality takes over. And this is kind of letting him run rampant with that behavior. So when you combine that with a cast that is performing well and is super entertaining, I mean, this game has a lot of laugh out loud moments. Like, I found it pretty funny for the most part. There's a lot of cheeky humor in scenes, and I think sometimes they do go a bit overkill. Like, there are times where, like, there are moments where something really significant is happening and they're still kind of butting in with jokes, and I get it because it plays to their personality, but I feel like those moments would have hit a lot harder if they weren't trying to crack jokes and let the moment sit, but they're always rushing to the next thing. But that's pretty much all of the positive things I have to say about the game. It's really the cast and the presentation. The world is beautiful. Metropolis is an absolute joy to look at. I wouldn't say play within or explore, but yeah, like, there are some pros to this game. Otherwise, though, you may have noticed I mentioned first half, right? First half was entertaining. As I progressed deeper into the game, the flaws became more apparent, and I really can see clearly what happened here. Because it starts off with things like Harley Quinn acting a little more questionable, doing things that are not very Harley Quinn, that I'm going to avoid spoiling, but just her behavior and reactions to certain people or occurrences in the game, I just didn't vibe with. And then when you add in on top of that, the way it's in the title, certain deaths are handled within the game, it can feel really rushed, because the first part of the game is really spent building up to taking down a particular character, and it's a puzzle. Like, hey, we're just a bunch of dudes with guns. How are we going to do this after all? And it's this build up and figuring it out, and the Justice League feels like a legit threat. Like, you're just super weak. Like, you're just a bunch of ants crawling around this city to them, and they'll just smush you if they feel like it. And I think the game does a good job of playing with that relationship where, yeah, they could come out and kill you if they wanted to, but there's reasons why they don't immediately, like wanting to bring you into Brainiac's fold. But then toward the end, it does two things. It starts to mold the story less around its characters and giving them time to breathe, and more around the live service mold. And so it quickly becomes a story less about these characters and killing the Justice League, and more how this is never going to end, and this is going to be something you're going to be doing for a long while, player. It felt very, I mean, it's a live service game, and I get that, so I'm not going to argue with the structure of the game, but it's definitely not to the story's benefit, because I think the first half was actually pretty acceptable, where I went, yeah, I don't love this gameplay, which I'll get into next, but the story, like, this is entertaining. But when you start to see very questionable decisions made and very rushed decisions made, like, the first chunk of the game is dedicated to one hero, and then, like, the last few hours, you just rip through it all, and it's over. It's crazy how quickly the script flips, where I feel like it almost reminds me of the Avengers, where I was playing it, oh, Ms. Marvel, like, running around, this kind of feels single player, and all of a sudden, whoop, live service. That same feeling came back, and I did not enjoy re-experiencing that. I thought we were long past that. So yeah, live service game, always online, third-person shooter. Batman is your play-by-play commentator, basically. So as you're taking out Brainiac's thugs, he's gonna be like, another one of them is taking him out. Be careful, you know. Just like it's definitely a weird way to experience these heroes. But the biggest problem I really have with the game beyond the story is how uninspired the whole gameplay loop is. You know, I tried to avoid doing the comparing and contrasting to the Arkham trilogy in this video because I want to look at it independently, but it's kind of impossible when you have such a pedigree like Rocksteady. And when you look at what they've done in the past with how they've gradually built out the kit for Batman, they invented the best action gameplay system imaginable, in my opinion. When you stitch all of that together versus very basic third-person shooting, I could have lived with that. But the biggest missed opportunity that frustrates me to no end is the talent tree. So as you complete missions and kill enemies, you're going to get XP, you're going to level up. At first, when I saw this, I was a little excited, I won't lie. I went, okay, not my usual superhero game, but hey, these talent trees remind me of Borderlands. I see 3 trees, maybe these are 3 different play styles, and they shoehorn you down specific routes. Like, you'll get one skill point You'll open the menu. Okay, what do I want to choose? They're like, no, you got to choose from this particular column here, and it's one of these 3 or 2 choices, and sometimes just one. And then when you level up again, it'll move you to the next column, and you'll pick from that again. I'm thinking to myself, where's the build customization here? Like, this is a multiplayer game. Like, don't we want to lean into this more? Because that kind of defines, you know, when you're playing online with your friends, what you do that's special from one another. And that's the biggest problem I think the game has, is that the reason the Arkham combat system and gameplay design worked so well was simply because there was a personality to the combat system, right? For every gadget you got that could be used against specific enemy types, it could also be used in the world itself. Whereas in this game, outside of traversal, where King Shark will jump building heights, and then you'll have Harley Quinn web swinging as an example, and then Deadshot's going to be using a jetpack, which is who I used for the most part. They all play the same, and the only differences between them all are the guns they wield, which is a tremendous mistake, a huge mistake, because I look at this game and I see so many moments where the design literally could have brought it from to great. And this was one of them, where I think some people would be able to stomach what is a story that feels pretty rushed with very questionable decisions if the game is just fun and it feels like, hey, Harley Quinn's a healer versus, you know, Boomerang, who's a sniper and does a lot of crit damage, versus Deadshot, who's like a grenadier. And I just feel like they don't give these characters enough special abilities. You'll unlock certain moves like your traversal attack, which is a giant AoE move. You'll unlock the suicide attack, which is good for singular targeting enemies, and you'll do a ton of damage to them. You get affliction strikes, so you'll be able to like hold down the melee button and hit them with, say, Frost, if that's the affliction attached to your melee weapon. Or you'll hold the circle button, because I played on PlayStation, and you'll throw out your grenade and it'll do some sort of elemental damage. That is the combat system. And since everyone plays by the same rules, it doesn't matter who you play as. Anytime I switched, it was because there's this psych up mechanic. And what that means is that these characters will get more damage dealt, and they'll gain more XP. So if certain characters are falling behind, then you kind of just speed run them to the same level as everyone else by switching to them, killing a couple baddies, and that's it. So there's no real grinding in the game when it comes to levels. I found it strange that all of your party members, I played independently the entire way through, don't just level up with you, but I digress. It is what it is. Still, what I described to you is the biggest problem of the game, in my opinion, is that one decision that Arkham made consistently was injecting the hero's personality into all of the moveset. But here, you can't have 4 anti-heroes that have vastly different kits when they're at their best and independent and bring them together and they all feel the same. That's problematic, especially in a superhero game, and I wish they did better here. So what differentiates you is loot. The way you get loot is actually enemies aren't going to be vomiting it constantly, which I appreciate. We've had a lot of loot vomit games, so it was kind of nice to play a game that said, here's a mission, beat it, here's a reward. And the rewards were usually pretty good. I will say this, if you did have the deluxe edition, you may have a different experience. For me, they started you off with 2 notorious weapons, which are the highest rank you can get next to infamy. And, you know, I was using those for a good chunk of the game, so some of the loot did not excite me. But a lot of the loot and also the talent tree is all percentage increases, like 5% more damage here, 2% more damage here, 5% damage reduction. It's a lot of those, not many unique effects. It's those notorious and infamous weapons that do have the unique effects. And I don't want to sound too greedy, but I do wish there were more of those, because I think since the game has the loot cycle, for me at least as a player who predominantly plays single player stuff, done right enough, I didn't feel like I was playing a game of chance. Like, there are these care packages that you can do, which are a game of chance, but that's not where you get the best loot. Like, you can re-roll stats, but overall the loot is preset outside of rerunning older missions. But nonetheless, when you want something, you can just go out and get it, which I found pretty nice about the game. But that's the main driving force here, is the loot. And if you're like me and you don't give a damn about the loot because the characters are uninteresting to play as, it makes the gameplay experience collapse, where, especially during the tutorial and the opening hours, I think what happened is I just eventually became numb to it. The game does have a flow. It works. It's snappy. It's well optimized. That was definitely true from Rocksteady, because when I was playing it, man, like, it ran totally well. And there was a lot of chaos on the screen. When you look at how beautiful this game is, and how much is going on, and how many enemies are flying around, and how many particle effects, like, it's very busy. And so it was impressive that it ran well, but again, if the loot and the gameplay do nothing for you, your opinion will sour quickly, and it'll become a double whammy when the story starts getting rushed, which for me, I didn't like the gameplay. I think I just got numb to it, got into a flow, got into a rhythm, and it just bugged me endlessly how mindless it felt, because I look at the Rocksteady combat system, and it feels like a betrayal of all those values, even down to like the UI. I know there were pictures going out around the time of the closed beta NDA lifting, and people saw how cluttered the UI was. That is not a lie. When you do some of the side missions in this game, it's all over the place, and like at times my eyes are literally glazed over, and I'm not really looking for things actively. I'm just hoping to find an enemy, and because the game is like Red Dead Redemption 2, like you just snap to your targets, it's like autopilot in this weird, unhealthy way. Yeah, gameplay was to me like a big no-no. I was not feeling it at all, but if you're into like action-packed third-person live shooters, I can totally see how people would enjoy this. For me though, in my taste, like I really wasn't feeling it, and I think I would have enjoyed it more if more characters had personality attached to those kits. And part of the reason the combat doesn't work is the enemy types. So you have ones that are like clones of the Flash, and so you have to take them down in certain ways. There are ones that you need to shield harvest, where you have to shoot them in their legs, which is increasingly difficult to do as the game gets more and more chaotic, especially when certain missions demand you to do that so that you can even do damage. Oh my god, we'll talk about that in a moment. There's enemies you have to counter, so you have to aim in and press one of the bumpers, and when you do, you'll shock them, and then they'll be open for damage. So there's ways to open them up, and you can see they tried to take some of the Arkham philosophies and carry them to a third-person shooter, but just like that's not going to work. It doesn't work here, that's for sure. And so the enemy types really aren't diverse enough to, I think, make combat encounters interesting, or even if the gameplay is very straightforward, which it is, that the enemy types make up for it. Like, it just, you could feel the design philosophies they were attempting to apply here from the Arkham free flow. Like, yeah, it's technically just one attack button and one counter button and a vault button. Like, yeah, you can just get around that way, but when you add layers on, it gets more and more complex, and that's where I think they failed to really adjust this particular combat system. So yeah, the enemy types just aren't that great, and ultimately, as I said, it lacks personality. So what happens is, as you're roaming this world, like let's say you're at the end game, or you're just playing as you're chipping away through the story, you're going to find a lot of side missions on the map. In particular, the end game, you have to like get a certain amount of currency to then do the final mission. It's weird how abrupt it becomes, very live servicey. It reminds me of actually Fallout 76, where you're going through and it's not that great, but you get to the end where you got to set off the nuke, and it suddenly feels like, oh, they're just introducing the end game loop here. This isn't the finale. Where at least the game's production value and cutscenes felt like there was a focus to the story, that there would be a finale, but it was very unsatisfying. So what you'll be doing is a lot of side missions on the map. They'll have the loot when it's like a predetermined one, and not like rerunning one. It'll have it laid out for you. And so you'll have characters that get psyched up for these missions. Like I mentioned earlier, they can get different buffs and bonuses. But these missions have particular gameplay requirements that are just not good. I don't know how else to put it. Like, they're just not good. So I mentioned one earlier where you had to shield harvest specific enemies. That was a nightmare. There are ones where you can only kill enemies after you gain a damage boost, and ways to activate that when, by the way, like nothing you do, you throw a grenade, you do an ultimate attack, you shoot them for hours, nothing does damage. You have to get a damage boost, which you have to do in a very oddly specific way, and then you get maybe 2 kills off of it, and you got to kill like 30 enemies. A lot of missions become way too long-winded, way too drawn out, and in turn, pretty frustrating. There's this one mission type that it's really where the UI goes crazy. You have to bring characters to a bus and drop them off there. So you'll find them hiding away in doors, and you'll find them hiding away in vents, and you'll pull them out, put them in this little ball, and carry them to a bus and drop them off. It's where the game, I think, is trying to synchronize gameplay with humor, but it feels very out there. But nonetheless, there are missions like that, which is where, again, I think things get way too chaotic. There are vehicle missions where you get into a hovercraft and just reign supreme down on your enemies, and I thought that was actually pretty enjoyable. I'll say that was my favorite type, because it felt like the gameplay switched up, which was nice. And so overall, the only other side thing you're going to be doing is the Riddler missions. The Riddler missions are here, and so you'll do sometimes AR challenges. Oftentimes, they're just scanning items in the world. You're not going to find really what you found in, say, Arkham games, where you'll do something with your gadgetry and that'll unlock a hidden room, and you're like, oh, that's what that was for. You can feel how the Riddler trophies are really defined by the tools you had in the Arkham games. So there's that. There's the side missions, and then there's contracts, which are pretty much the passive earn while you play type rewards. You know, you'll go through the game, oh, kill 15 enemies with a sniper, and then you'll cash it in for a reward. And so that's the game. That's the game. And yeah, definitely, if you couldn't tell, it's a wait for a sale, because I don't think it's bad. I don't despise the game, but it's left me very much wondering what happened. Why were certain decisions made, not just narratively, but gameplay wise? Why did this have to be live service? I don't see the point in all of that. It feels like so much of it was produced to be a single player game. You can feel the Rocksteady quality in many pockets of the game, where again, it's not bad, it's just not really what I was hoping for, and much of the gameplay falls flat and the story falls flat. I just wonder what was happening. I know much of the talent that originally made these games I adore left. We've seen how that goes with something like Redfall, where like talent really matters. And so yeah, losing some of that really did impact this game for sure, but I don't know why it had to be live service, and why this needs 12 seasons apparently, and why it ended the way it did, and why certain characters are where they are. A lot of question marks. Very unsatisfying, very disappointing. As someone who, as you saw, like, you can check the notes, right? Like, I did not really cover this game leading into launch. I really didn't have any sort of bone to pick with it. You know, Rocksteady has definitely earned my trust with all of their games, but this is something else, man. I'm really disappointed in what they put together here. So yeah, I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I feel like here it's one of those games I could see people liking, especially if you've never played the Arkham games. There are certain things I'm complaining about that you'll go like, so, and that's great. Like, go enjoy it. But I think, like, if you bought this game for $20, yeah, you know what? Like, you actually may end up liking it a lot. I think for me, as someone who spent $100 to get the digital deluxe edition, yeah, probably don't want to spend that much money. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Suicide Squad. Not my favorite game of the year, but if you compare it to last year's bad games, definitely, in my opinion, better than those bad games. Just not what I was hoping for from Rocksteady. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.